Hello and welcome to this new improved Hexapuff video workshop where I will demonstrate how you can make Hexapuff items with small and big circular knitting machines like blankets and cushions or pillows. When I made my video workshop about making blankets with small circular knitting machines, I get a lot of response from people who have big circular knitting machines like the Addiexpress or the Sentroknittingmachine, and they ask me if it is possible to make blankets with the big tubes. Of course that's possible, but when you make this size blanket, it's going to be very big, because when you watch this small flower, I made a similar flower pillow, and I made a similar flower pillow that's made with a Addi king size with 46 needles, and you can see that that flower is a lot bigger than that small flower. So imagine that you make this pattern with all those big puffs. The blanket will be huge. This blanket is about 150 centimeters high and about 140 centimeters wide. So that's already very big. But in this version, I will demonstrate to you how you can make your own projects and design them with every single knitting machine. And I am going to explain to you how you can make them very simple and very quick without having too much work. So, heyo, let's continue. In this video workshop, I will demonstrate to you step by step how you can make blankets and pillows very quick in the most simple way. When you want to make hexapuffs, you need a circular knitting machine. With small circular knitting machines, you make small puffs, and with big knitting machines, you make big puffs. So, these puffs are made with this machine, and these are made with the small machine, and the difference is big. It's very big. So when you want to make a pattern with the big machine, you have to find a very small pattern, because the more circles you need, the bigger it's going to be. You can design your own pattern by using a template like this. You can find them on the internet and print them yourself. But you can also use quilt patterns that are made for hexagons. So this is the one I used for this blanket. But you can use all kind of patterns, but be aware, don't make it too big. You can also use parts from a pattern. So for a baby blanket, you can use a small part of a pattern. That's not complicated. There are all kinds of patterns you can find on the internet. But you can also search for water bead patterns or aqua bead patterns, and that you can use to make hexapuff projects. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate it step by step. So we start with nothing and we end with pillows or blankets. There are two types of pillows I will demonstrate to you. We have the pillow completely made of puffs, and we have the pillows made of two panels that are flowers with a with something in between. I will show everything. I did the math. You don't have to calculate anything. I did that. I will show everything. Please watch the complete video, because everything is explained, so you don't miss a step. When you are at a chapter that you already know because you follow my videos, then you can simply skip that chapter. In the description of this video, you find a lot of helpful information, but also you will find timestamps for the different chapters. So you can use the timestamps in the description of this video. And for the rest, yes, just follow the video, and I hope that all questions will be answered in the video and you can make your own creations with the puffs. So let's continue to the basic information and let's start. These puffy circles are basically just tubes and every machine gives a different size. I'm going to show you how you can finish them off, but first you have to knit them. And when you have a machine with 22 needles, a small circular knitting machine, you are going to knit 17 rows, and that will give a puffy circle. When you knit a row less, it will be a little bit less puffy. And when you knit a row more, it will be a little bit more puffy, but basically 17 is okay. So, when you have a machine with 40 needles, like this one, you knit 30 rows or a row less or more. When you have a machine with 44 needles, you are going to knit 32 rows or a row less or more. Make them just all the same. When you have a machine with 46 needles, you have to knit 34 rows or a row less or more. And with 48 needles, you are going to knit 36 or less or more rows. And then you are going to close with the use of the yarn tails. Making a circle and prepare it for assembling works the same for every size machine. I'm going to demonstrate it on 2 tubes. I'm going to pull at the yarn tail at the end of my project that I just used to cast off. I'm not going to close it further than just pulling my yarn tail. I'm going to pull the yarn tail at the opposite end also, making sure that all the ripped parts are rolled to the inside, and I'm just going to pull it close, as neat as possible. And then I'm going to pick up my needle that's still on my work, and I'm going to poke it through the hole I just closed with it to the opposite hole, pull through, and then I have both ends on the same side, and I'm going to simply knot them firm together. This way my circle is made. And now I'm going to prepare it for assembling by putting both ends into my yarn needle. And then put them between the layers of your circle by poking it through the hole to the edge of your circle to the outside. Make sure your needle is not going through the layers, but only in between the layers. Then cut one yarn tail and put it aside for another project. And then I'm going to secure the remaining yarn tail at the edge of my circle. Here is where it came out. I'm going to poke my needle under 2 bars between the V-stitches. This is a V-stitch. Those bars you need. And I'm going to make a half knot around my yarn needle. At the point of my yarn needle, I'm making a loop. And I'm putting it around my yarn needle. And then I pull it around it tight, and then I'm going to push my needle through that half knot, and then my yarn tail is secured to the edge and ready for the next step. We are going to use the yarn tail for assembling. So it's exactly the same on every size tube. So I'm taking another tube from another machine. I'm pulling it close as neat as possible. And then I go to the opposite end. Oh, I forgot. I had to join a new piece of yarn because I ran out. So this is not part of closing the tube, but just finishing off those ends. So I'm going to close the opposite end the same way. That will always need some help because the ribs on this side will always roll to the outside. So roll them back to the inside. Take your time to close it. And when it's as good as closed, you take your needle, make your circle flat. And then you are going to poke your needle at the end where the yarn comes out to the other side. And you are going to knot those two tails tight together. And when you have done that, take both yarn tails and put it into your yarn needle. Make sure your tube is completely flat in a circle now. And then you are going to stick your needle with those tails all the way to the edge between the layers. And let it come out somewhere. And pull it all the way through. Make sure your circle stays flat. And then you are going to cut one of those ends. That will disappear on the inside. And take the other end and secure it at the edge where it comes out under the two bars between the V-stitches with a half knot. So take your yarn, make a twist, twist it to the back, make sure that the yarn end you have to pull is on the back of the loop. Put it around your needle, pull at the yarn and close it around the needle, and then just push through the needle with the yarn all the way. I always hold it with my fingers. And now it's ready for the next step, assembling. In this step, we start assembling our circles into stripes. And later on, I will show you how you can join those stripes into your whatever pattern you are making. Joining into stripes is not complicated. So when you have made your stripes, you can assemble them, but first you have to make those stripes. For that, we are going to use our V-stitches at the edge of our flat circle. And when you look at your stitches, you will recognize those V-stitches. A stitch like this. Every knitted stitch will result into a V-stitch. And we are going to join those V-stitches of the circles to each other at certain points. It depends on your size machine that you use to knit your circles, how many stitches you have to join and on what place. You have a certain amount of stitches per machine. I'm going to try to explain how it works, but you can just follow the video workshop and then it will also be clear. This is my grid and I'm going to join my circles on the sides to each other, like this. But since every machine has another amount of stitches, I made a little schedule. Make a print screen of the machine you are going to use. And when you are going to use a machine with 22 needles, you are going to join 4 stitches on the side, skip 7 stitches and start joining 4 stitches on the side. Those 7 stitches are needed to join to the next stripe of circles. So when you have a machine with 22 needles, make a print screen of this schedule that will help you later. When you have a machine with 40 needles, you are going to join 7 stitches on the sides and leave open 13 stitches, which you are going to need to join to the next stripe. So we are going to join 7 stitches with 13 stitches in between. But I'm going to demonstrate how to do that. When you have a machine with 44 needles, you are going to join 8 stitches on every side. When you have a machine with 46 needles, you are going to join with 8 stitches also on both sides with 15 stitches in between. And when you have a machine with 48 needles, you are going to join 8.5 stitch on every side. And what is a half stitch? A half stitch is not a complete V-stitch. So not 2 bars or like this, not 2, but only 1. So that's just 1 stitch. And then when you continue later, you are going to pick up the upside down V-stitches. That doesn't matter, you can smuggle. So, but I already calculated it, and now I will demonstrate to you how to join them with the use of the tails we left on our circles. So let's continue. Joining your circles into stripes is very simple. I'm going to demonstrate to you how you can join them with 2 or more circles into long stripes. I'm going to show where to start, how to do middle parts and how to finish off for every circular knitting machine. Joining 2 is just finishing off, and joining more is watching from start to finish. I already calculated for every machine what to do. Make a print screen. Later this will be clear, or use the pause button and draw this schedule. It will help you later on. In the left corner you see the amount of needles of your machine, and the calculation will be explained. I need 3 circles with the long yarn ends that I will use to join the sides to each other to explain everything. So it's very simple. I'm also going to use the schedule. The last end I don't use, but I'm going to cut it after I finish off my project to avoid mistakes. So I'm going to use my schedule for my circular knitting machine with 22 needles, since I've knitted with that machine. When I used another machine, I used that schedule. It works exactly the same. I'm going to use my yarn end to join my first circle to a middle one. To find my place where I have to start joining, I'm counting back from the yarn end of the middle one 7 stitches. Those are the stitches we have to skip between the side joinings. You can find them at the edge. They're upside down maybe, but that doesn't matter. You are going to count the lines of stitches, and you are going to count 7 stitches with your yarn tail going to the left. So you're counting clockwise from your yarn tail, and when you have find your 7 stitches, you are going to pick up the 8th stitch with your yarn needle. And now it's important that you hold it this way. You are going to join from the right to the left with the yarn tail pointing up, so that is already in position for joining the next circle. So it has to be here. In the same position as the pink one, I'm going to use to connect the second one. I have skipped 7 stitches and I've put my needle into the 8th stitch, which is the first one of the 4 stitches. Then I'm going to find my first stitch on the left of the yarn tail that's on the opposite. So this is my first of the second one. And now I have to find my first V-stitch of the pink one, the first one. And it's just on the left of that yarn tail. Pick up the whole stitch. So we have joined now 1 stitch to 1 stitch, and we have to join 4. I'm going to pick up my second stitch on the second circle and my second stitch on the first circle. Then I'm going to pick up my 3rd stitch on the second circle and my 3rd stitch on the first circle. And my last stitch, my 4th stitch on the second circle and the 4th stitch on the first circle. And then my work looks like this. I'm going to pull at my yarn and I will close it seamless to each other. And now I'm going to make a knot. I'm going to stick my needle through the last pair of stitches I went through already. I stick it in the needle and then I'm going to fold my yarn like this around the needle. Whoops. I'm making a half knot by just twisting it and then put it around the needle and pull, and then you have a little knot, and then I'm going to pull my yarn through while I'm holding it and hiding the yarn tail between the layers of the circle with the same color. And then I'm going to cut that yarn tail. I can use it for a scrap yarn head, so I hold it apart. I put my work back into the begin position with the yarn tail on the upper right, so you can join the next circle in the correct place. This is going to be my last circle, so it's not important where I start joining because I'm going to cut that yarn end. I don't have to count my stitches because I don't have to use that yarn end. And then I'm going to join it simple with 4 pair of stitches or whatever pair you need to join. Make sure you do it like this, otherwise your work will not be a long stripe, but it will be a stripe with corners. I'm going to join 4 stitches. When you have another machine, you have to join another amount of stitches and leaving another amount of stitches open. So with 40 needles you have to join 7 stitches, with 44 needles you have to join 8 stitches, with 46 needles also, and with 48 you have to join 8.5 stitch. So I'm continuing joining my last circle. I can start wherever I like, picking up my first V-stitch and continue picking up all the 4 pairs, and then I'm going to finish off the end and stick it away, hide it, and you will never see it again. I've joined them. I'm going to pull, check if you did it correct. Make sure tension is okay and close. Hiding the end between the layers, make sure you don't stick it to the outside and to the inside again. And so you can make your stripes, that makes joining so much easier. So make your stripes. You can do it row by row. And then in the next step, I'm going to show you how you can assemble them. That's also very simple with a small instruction to start and to end. So let's continue. And I've joined all the stripes that I need to explain all the projects in this workshop. Assembling goes very quick. I have finished all my stripes and now I'm going to join them to each other. The stripes can make all kinds of shapes, like just a single flower or like the complete blanket I made with the owl. We are simply going to join the V-stitches in a zigzag line to each other. And for that we have to start at a special point, and I will explain that for every machine. In our schedule we have the stitch amount of a complete point, and for the 22 needle that are 7 stitches. And we are going to join those 7 stitches to each other, but we are going to start at a halfway circle. And for that I have to start at stitch number 4. I will demonstrate what I mean with that when I use a circular knitting machine with 22 needles. When I made it with a 40 needle machine, I have to start at stitch 7. When I use a 44 needle machine, I have to start at stitch 8. With a 46 Addi king size, I have to start at stitch 8. And with the machine with 48 needles, I also have to start at stitch 8. So use the schedule for your circle. And now I will demonstrate what I mean with start at that number stitch. Let's make some space. I'm going to use these 2 stripes. When we look at our schedule, I have to start with stitch 4. On this circle, I need all my 7 V-stitches to form the point. And now we have to count our stitches to know where we have to start our joining. For that I am going to count my 7 stitches on this circle, and then I have to count 4 stitches on this circle. So, and those 2 ends will form the starting point of my project, and I'm going to start at the 4th stitch. I'm using a contrasting color just for demonstrating to you how it works. It's very simple. It's very simple. I leave my yarn. I don't cut it, so I know that then it's always long enough when I'm joining a blanket. I have to count 4 stitches on this side. I always start at the shortest row stitches, and I pick up that 4th stitch on my needle and I pull through the yarn. I don't need a very long piece of yarn, and now my piece is joined at stitch number 4. The other side I have to pick up stitch number 7 at the beginning of the point. So I have to start counting 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, stitch number 7. I'm picking that up, and now my pieces are joined. And from now it's very simple. We are going to join stitch to stitch, 1 stitch to 1 stitch, just all V stitches. make sure that you stay in the same line with the edge. Sometimes you have to hop over, but make sure you go stitch by stitch until you come at a joining point where two circles are joined. Don't pull at your yarn so you can see very clear what you are doing. And now I come at a joining point and I'm going to push my needle through both circles and use it as a V-stitch. And then I continue joining V-stitches. You will pull at your yarn later or when you need more yarn, because a lot of it is hidden just in the joining. See? You will get a zigzag, so I will continue until I'm at the end, and at the end I have to join 4 stitches. And this is what it is. I'm going to push through the joining of those 2 circles here, like it's a V-stitch, and continue joining V-stitch to V-stitch. When I run out of yarn, I'm going to pull at my yarn, easy, slow, and your work will close. And when you have done it good, you can just pull through your yarn. I'm going to continue until I am going to join the last 2 circles to each other with 4 stitches. My last change between 2 circles, and then I only have to join this end with 4 stitches, the same as we start with, we also end with, and that counts for every circular knitting machine. The same amount you start with, you are going to finish with. So I'm going to join the last 4 pairs. And of course, because I like the magic part when I am pulling at the yarn, my yarn end is a bit too short now, but I'm almost done with making this video, so I cannot start over, but the problem is already solved. So I have joined my 4 pairs, and then I'm going to pull at my yarn and see that I get the right tension between the stripes, and then I leave the tails because I will finish them off when the complete project is joined. So this is how you do that. When you're project is joined, the flat one, you are going to make sure that all the tension is correct. And then we are simply going to knot the ends. I'm going to stick them to through the last pair again, like in a little circle, and fold my yarn tail over my needle, and then I'm going to pull at my yarn tail. I'm holding the little loops and pull through the needle, and then I'm going to stick my yarn needle between the layers, pull through and cut. And there's another piece of scrap yarn for another project. Continue doing this with all the yarn ends until they are all gone. Hide your yarn tail between the two layers. Make sure you don't go through the layers, so I have to redo this. I'm just pulling out the yarn and do it over. That way they will disappear completely and they will also not get loose. Cut off the yarn, and gone is the yarn tail. Continue closing all those ends and then your flat project is finished. When you join flowers, you can make a scarf. You can use them to sit on. You can make a blanket. It's all the same technique. With the panels, you can make nice pillows. You can make pillows by joining two panels to each other. That's the first method I'm going to demonstrate right after this introduction. And you can use tubes to assemble two panels to each other and make big, thick pillows. So there are different types of pillows and I will demonstrate both techniques, inclusive the calculating of everything. So the only thing you have to do is joining the panels to each other, and that's very simple, as I will demonstrate in the following chapters. When you join two panels to each other and put stuffing in between, you get a very nice comfy pillow. For that, I'm going to take a long piece of yarn that fits at least around my panel, and then I'm going to join them. It's very simple to do. You made your tube with an amount of stitches in the round, and we are going to use those V stitches that you will find on the edge of your circle. See, those V stitches are in fact 2 bars, and we are going to join those V stitches that are in the same line with each other. So I'm going to start joining at the point where you can easily find the first stitches. See, they are just next to each other. Try to pick up those stitches as much as possible on the edge of your circle. So I'm picking up my first V, and then I'm going to pick up the first V on the opposite circle. I'm not going to pull my yarn tight. That was in a loop, so. And then I'm going to find the next V, the next two legs of the V, and also on the other panel, and then you continue picking up those V's one by one until you come at the point where you have to go to the next one. I'm going to put my finger in between so I can see it clear. We are going to pull our yarn tight later, because you can see it more clear when you don't pull at your yarn. And when you get at the point where you come to the transfer between the two, you just poke your needle from one circle to the other circle as if it is a V-stitch. So you go through both circles and do that also at the other side, so that gives an extra firm connection. And continue picking up V-stitches along the edge. And when you have done a few more, you are going to pull at your yarn to close the circles to each other. It's just by pulling at your yarn, and then your circles are joined. Continue doing this until you are almost around, and leave a gap because we have to stuff. I'm almost done with closing, so I will continue a little bit more until I have my gap. It goes so quick. I almost forgot to stop. I'm going to start stuffing, and I'm putting stuffing in all the little balls that are at the edges, so they got all their own stuffing. And when I have stuffed all those little balls, I'm going to put stuffing in the middle. And of course, I'm going to check if I have stuffing all the way around. Take your time to do this as equal as possible. And start continuing closing. And add stuffing on the go. So when you're almost done, that your pillow is almost stuffed. I'm making sure that I put stuffing in my last and all puffs. And I'm putting in the last bits. And then I'm closing up. And this pillow is almost finished. I make a mistake. The last stitches might be a little bit difficult because of the tension on the pillow, but take your time. Those few stitches will also be connected in a few seconds. My really last stuffing. I'm continuing doing what I'm doing. And when I pull at my yarn, everything will tighten and close. So it doesn't matter that there is a gap now, because in a second it will disappear. Stitching my last stitches. And there we are. And now I'm going to close. And checking that my tension is okay all the way. And then I'm just going to knot those two yarn tails to each other. And I'm going to stick them to the inside and the outside again. I cut the tails and this cushion is finished. This pillow is ready to use. When you want to make another type of pillow, you can simply add a tube between the two flowers. And then you get a flat, thick pillow that's very firm and that you can sit on or use as a cat bed or play with it, or children like to sit on them. And you can just use the same panel. I have calculated the length of the tube for all machines for both flowers, and I will explain how to knit and how to join them to each other. And it's very simple. It's just as simple as making this one, only you have to do this twice. But in the next step I will show the calculation for all machines, and then you can make this pillow following the instructions how to join this to each other. So let's continue. For the flower cushion you need 2 flowers and you need a tube that is long enough that it will fit around the complete flower. For that I have calculated everything. See, it's going to be just between the 2 layers. And the length is very important. When you make a flower with a big machine, you need a very long tube. But when you knit the tube with a big machine, the tube is going to be very wide and your pillow will be very thick. So you can knit a panel and close that into a smaller tube with your big machine. So you can make every size tubes with just one machine. There goes a lot of stuffing in the pillow, and when the tube in between is twice as wide, you need twice as much stuffing. So better make smaller tubes from panels. I have done the math and calculated the length of the tubes for the different patterns with the different machines, and I will explain how I did it, but you can just write over the numbers. The length depends on the size machine you use to knit your flower. To knit your fitting tube, you have to calculate 22 needles you used for the flower times 6 makes 132 rows for your tube at least. When you have made your flower with a big machine, you multiply the amount of needles times 6 and that gives you the row length to fit that flower. So for the 7-petal flower, you knit 6 times the needle size you use to knit your flower to knit a tube, plus 10 rows, and you can make a smaller tube by just folding over a panel and close it into a tube. When you want to make a tube to fit around your 19-petal flower, you use this chart. When you have knitted with a 22 needle machine, you have to multiply times 10 to get the length of your tube. It has to be at least 220 rows to fit. Knit 10 more. For a machine with 40 needles, you have to knit a tube at least 400 rows. When you are knitting tubes with bigger machine, also multiply times 10 to get the length and add 10 more rows to be sure, at least. When you are using big machines, you make big circles. When you make it with the 19-petal pattern, it's going to be very big. And best you are going to knit your tube made out of a panel into a smaller tube, so you don't need a lot of stuffing. So use the numbers for your pattern plus 10 to make fitting tubes, and now I will demonstrate how to make the tubes. You have to knit these tubes with the use of scrap yarn. I'm going to demonstrate to you how you can add the scrap yarn and how you can remove it very quick. First I'm going to start to knit with my scrap yarn a couple of rows. And then I'm going to change to another color of scrap yarn. I'm just cutting my yarn, putting it to the inside between the last and the first needle. And then I take another piece of scrap yarn and put it into my feeder, also between the last and the first needle. Make sure that the tails are long enough to reach the table. And knit one round, so every single needle has to pick the color once. I'm cutting my yarn and putting my tail between the last and the first needle, as every tail I have used. And then I'm taking my working yarn. I'm hanging a long piece of thread inside my machine because I'm going to use it to pick up my stitches and do whatever I want to do with them. I'm going to demonstrate to you how I like to close my tube. But first, you have to put your yarn between the last and the first needle. And then you are going to knit. So what have we done? We have started with scrap yarn, changed to another color and knit one round with scrap yarn. And now I'm just knitting my desired pattern. That's not interesting because that's for a special project. And now I'm finished. I'm cutting my yarn a long piece because I want to use it to close my tube. I'm taking it out of the feeder between the last and the first needle again. And then I'm going to put my scrap yarn into my feeder between the last and the first needle. And I'm going to knit one round. See? Just the same place all the time between the last and the first needle. One round, so every needle just picks the yellow color in this case one time. I'm taking it out of the feeder and I'm taking another piece of scrap yarn. And I'm going to knit a couple of rounds with the scrap yarn. And after knitting a couple of rounds, there are no rules. I'm just cutting my yarn and knitting until my work drops from the machine. So I'm continue cranking when my yarn runs out until my project comes loose. Now I'm going to demonstrate how I'm going to close the tube. I'm going to close the tubes with the use of my 5.5mm crochet hook. It's 5.5mm. You can search for your size in your country. Tubes have two ends, the casting on and the casting off end. And we are going to start with the casting off end. I'm turning the inside to the outside and I'm going to show you the last knitted stitches with my working yarn that are captured between the scrap yarn. And when you put all those ends to the right, you will find your working yarn and you will find those two yarn tails of that single strand row. So those three ends we need. You see that the working yarn is in the middle and the yarn end closest to you goes into the first stitch we need to close the first pair. So I stick my needle through that last stitch and to the first stitch. Look, the working yarn is in the middle and those two yarn tails are coming out of those two stitches. And when you look at the rest of the stitches, you will see that you can line them up easily into pairs. I'm putting my needles into all the pairs so you can see how it looks like. And this way you can see if you're doing it correct, because a tube with 22 stitches has 11 pair stitches. So I have to check if I have 11 pair. If not, I made a mistake with picking up those first pair. Those first two stitches. Now I'm putting my needle into my last pair. Those are next to each other, but also in front of each other. And now I have 11 pairs. And I'm ready to close the pairs. So I'm sticking my crochet hook into that first two loops and I'm taking my working yarn and with the hook I'm going to pull the yarn through the two loops. And now I've started closing my tube. I'm going to pick up the next pair, pulling the yarn through all three loops on my hook. From now on I have 3 loops on my hook every time I'm going to close a pair. And I'm going to close all 11 pairs. And my last stitch, you always end with a pair. And then I'm pulling my yarn another time through that single loop, and the tube is closed. You have the scrap yarn tails on the right. I'm turning so that my working yarn is on the right, and now I'm going to pull out that single row with scrap yarn. That easy, and you can lift off the rest, and now this side of your tube, the end is closed. And now we have to close the beginning of the tube, and that first stitch is a little bit more difficult to find. The hidden stitch is easy to find, but most people make the mistake by not searching for it, so they look at the loops and they think that this stitch is the first stitch and this is the opposite stitch, but it's not. You have to look at where your scrap yarn goes through. Find the first two loops where the yarn ends of the scrap yarn go through. And then you will find that the piece closest to you, that stitch, is a little bit hidden. This is the first stitch and the opposite stitch, and the working yarn is in between. And when you're not sure, you are going to count your 11 pairs again. Line them up. And my last pair, you always end with a pair. And then you continue closing as we did at the end of the tube, exactly the same way. When you are getting used to this, you don't need all those needles anymore. They are just for learning purpose. And sometimes I make also a mistake and I don't end up with a pair. And when I don't end up with a pair, I made a mistake. So I have to undo the closing by just pulling out those stitches and start over finding the first two stitches that form a pair. Now I'm going to demonstrate to you how you can join your tube nice to your flowers and make this pillow. It goes very quick and it's very simple to do this very neat. I'm using yarn in the color of my tube to assemble, and of course I have two flowers. It doesn't matter what size, the method is exactly the same to join the tube to the flowers. First I'm going to join one flower to my tube. I'm putting my yarn into my yarn needle. And then I'm ready to assemble. I'm going to explain which stitches I'm going to use. On the petals, I'm going to use those V-stitches that are on the edge of every petal. I'm going to use every V-stitch one by one for assembling. I'm going to assemble them to my tube, and on the edge of my tube there is that one track with the vertical bars, and that are we going to use to assemble to our V-stitch. One V-stitch assembled to 2 bars. It's all the same. One V-stitch onto 2 bars. I will demonstrate how to do this. I'm going to start at the first V-stitch next to my join of the petals, and I pick up the first visible V-stitch on my petal, and I push through my needle with the yarn. And then I'm going to find the first 2 bars on the edge of my tube, and I pick them up and I pull through the yarn. I'm going to find my next V-stitch and pick that up. That's very simple to find. Pull through the yarn, not all the way, and then stick your needle into the same stitch you came out and pick up the next 2 bars on your tube. Then the next V on the petal and the 2 vertical bars on your tube. 1 V-stitch, 2 bars, next V-stitch, 2 bars. Look how nice and neat this is going to work. Continue picking up those V-stitches and those bars until you come at the point where we go to the next petal. Just continue until you have reached your last V-stitch of this petal. This is my last stitch. And now I'm going to poke through both petals. So I stick in my needle in one, go through the joining and come out on the next petal. And you treat this as a V-stitch. So pull through the yarn and pick up 2 bars. And then continue picking up the next V-stitch as if nothing happened and pick up 2 bars. V-stitch. You can pull at the yarn to close the tube to the petals, and this will close very nice. Make sure the tension is correct, and this is what it looks like. Continue joining this all the way around. When your yarn is not long enough, you can just pull it through, and then you can continue joining all the way around. Because you knitted your tube a few rows longer, smoggling will not be necessary and it will fit perfect. When your tube is too small, you have to smuggle. But I hope you knitted it long enough. I'm almost done. I have knitted my tube perfect length. I hope you knitted your tube a few rows longer. When it's too short, you can smuggle by just picking up less or more bars to make it fit. But this tube fits perfect. I'm picking up my last bar. And then I'm going to pull my yarn to close the tube to the flower. I'm taking my time to make sure that the tension is correct all the way around. No holes, no loops. Just making sure it fits nice and snug. And when I'm okay, I'm just going to knot those two tails. I have to cut my yarn from a skein. I'm just going to knot them together. When your tube is a bit longer, you just take the tail of the fitting end and you join it to the tube where it touches each other. And then we are going to join the ends of the tubes as nice as possible. For that, I'm going to use one yarn tail that I took to the outside, and we are going to join the tubes by picking up V-stitches or upside down V-stitches when your work is turned around. It doesn't matter as long as you do the same stitch. I'm going to pick up my V-stitches just along the edge, one by one. When your work is longer, you just pick up one row. I'm going to pick up the same stitches on the opposite end. So one by one every V-stitch. So here's my end. I'm going to pick up one V-stitch on that end and a V-stitch on the other end. And I'm pulling through my yarn, not tight. And then I'm going to continue picking up those stitches. Basically, you are going in where you came out and pick up two bars, the two legs of the V. So when you're joining and you have a longer end, you just follow one row. When you go in where you came out, you will always stay in the same row, so you will not go wrong. And that end will go to the inside. It will bend to the inside and disappear completely when you have finished your pillow. Always when filming, things go wrong, but it's already corrected. So I continue closing. You can pull at your yarn, but then you cannot see your stitches clear. I like to show it. Pull at your yarn nice and slow, making sure that everything goes correct. And continue closing till the end. There are about 22 stitches for this tube. When you have a smaller tube made with a bigger machine, make sure that the ridge of joining is on the inside. Then it will be invisible and nobody will know. So this is finished. Look how nice. And now I'm going to join it into a knot. Look how nice it's also at the inside. I'm making a half knot, but you can close this, finish this off the way you like it. And you can leave the tail on the inside, and now is this half of your flower ready. And we only have to close the lid by joining the next flower the same way. For that, I'm picking up my yarn again into my needle, and I'm going to start at the point where I joined the tubes, and I'm going to find the first bars, pick up two you are going to follow the same track all the way around. It will go automatically. And then you find your first V of the first petal and you are going to pick up that V-stitch and then continue joining 2 bars to 1 V-stitch. Maybe you have the flower pointing towards you, then you do the same, picking up 1 V-stitch versus 2 bars. And when you come at the point where the petals are joined, you pick up that join as if it's a V-stitch. And you go all the way around, but not all the way because we have to stuff. So I see you back at that point. I'm almost finished with closing up my pillow and I have started stuffing already. I'm going to put more stuffing in it and then continue closing, stuff, close, stuff till it's all the way stuffed and closed. I'm stuffing it firm without stretching my work. And I keep continuing closing. I'm closing up my last stitches. I'm going as far as possible with closing until my tails meet each other. Here they are. I'm pulling my tails so the flower closes completely to the tube. I'm checking if everything is stuffed and done. And then I'm going to knot those 2 tails to each other. I'm putting them into my yarn needle. I stick them to the inside and let them come out somewhere else. Pull through without pulling out the stuffing. And cut the ends and keep them for a scrap yarn head or something. And then your pillow is finished, and this method works for all sizes and all patterns exactly the same. So this is how you make pillows and blankets with your circular knitting machine that are very easy with a very big output. I hope you found the inspiration to make your own fantastic creations. When you liked the video, please give me a thumb up and join my channel if you don't want to miss anything. In the description of this video, you will find links to my English workshops and all kinds of handy information. Feel free to tip me, to buy me a cup of coffee or some cat treats. Thank you. Bye bye, with love from Holland. Pop, ben je uitgespeeld? Ja.